Carlsen defeated Caruana in the quarterfinals of the Speed Chess Championship with a score of 22 versus 4. He did not even lose one single game in the whole match. There were 8 games in the first segment, which was of time control 5 plus 1, then 8 games with time control 3 plus 1, and then 10 games with 1 plus 1. I'm going to show you the final moments of all of these games. So let us go to the first game. Game 1, Carlsen has to deal with the passed pawn on d2, but Carlsen has 2 passed pawns of his own going forward. Carlsen plays knight e3 with seconds left for both sides. It is equal. Here, Caruana had to play rook takes and knight takes, and then knight into f5 and deal with that passed pawn. Instead, he played king e5, allowing rook d7, and now made a big mistake of rook c8. He should have still taken on d1 first. And now rook takes d2, king e4, king comes in, takes, takes, and finally the e pawn decided the game. Rook went back, but Carlsen plays rook d8, and here Caruana resigned. Carlsen started the match with a victory in the first game. Game 2. Carlsen has an extra c pawn. Carlsen plays rook d2, queen moves, and then rook moves, attacking the queen, queen moves. Pawn just pushes forward, rook a1, pawn pushes again, and suddenly the pawn is already here, and rook d1 threatening mate. So Caruana plays f3, but then rook d3. And now pawn c3 and rook d2 is coming because of f3. He forced f3 and now rook d2 is a threat. Queen e7, but then just rook d2 and Caruana lost. Game 3 was a rook and minor piece endgame. Carlsen has an extra pawn over here. He plays king g2, takes, and the extra pawn falls. He couldn't have saved it either way. The pawn was about to fall anyway. There was no defense. So after takes and takes, the pawn falls, and now it's just a drawn rook endgame. They go for a pawn endgame, and then it's a draw by insufficient material. Game 4 was also a draw, rook and 2 pawns versus rook and 2 pawns. An exchange of rooks and 2 same side pawns, no problems for either side, and a draw by insufficient material. Game 5 was a minor piece endgame with pawns on same side of the board. And after the exchange, again, a draw by insufficient material. So 3 straight draws after the first 2 wins for Carlsen. Carlsen enjoys a good lead in the match. Game number 6. Caruana has a decent position here, and he played pawn h7, which is a mistake because it allows king g7 and the king gets to h8. So basically, Caruana should have waited before pushing. He should have played bishop b1, and after, let's say, a3, just bishop a2 and everything is blockaded. If bishop e4, then just knight d7. And if king e7, knight f6, everything is defended. But then he went for the premature h7, but king g7, knight h5, king h8, bishop b1, but too late. Bishop e4, bishop a2, and bishop c2. The bishop gets to b3, pushing the white bishop away, and the knight jumps in now. And it's all over because bishop d3, a2, and Caruana resigns. Game 7, Carlsen plays h5, pushing his h-pawn forward, g6, and knight h4. Here, Caruana decided bishop d6 and queen e3, and then pawn takes. He decided to take on h5, which ruins his endgame. Any endgame here would be bad for Caruana because of the bad pawn structure, the double pawns. Carlsen is going to do exactly that. He wants to go to the endgame with queen f5. King h8, queen f5, takes kings, and the king quietly jumps up and picks up the pawn. A nice king match. c3 and f4. The king comes back. The bishop goes away and the d pawn falls. King e8 and b5. Here, Caruana resigned because the b pawn and the c pawn are going to go forward. Game 8 was a bishop versus knight endgame, and both kings were active. So the bishop is slightly better, but they both repeated moves here, and they were happy with the draw. This was the last game of the first segment, which is of time control 5 plus 1. Now the next 8 games are of time control 3 plus 1. Game 9, the first game of the 3 plus 1 segment, Caruana has a queen against Carlsen's rook, knight, and 2 pawns. So Caruana gives a check, king moves, queen takes pawn, b pawn fell. King moves, now it's rook, knight, and 1 pawn against a queen. Manageable, right? Knight moves in, king moves, rook check, king moves, f3, queen check, Queen moves down to give checks. Knight f4, king moves down, and knight moves, queen check. And here he went for queen g6. He should have gone for other checks like queen h2 or queen g2, queen f2, which would have kept the queen active for checks. But then after queen g6, the queen just got cut off. Then the king got in. Queen takes, and the pieces just shield the king. This must have reminded Carlsen of his World Championship match against Nepo, the longest game 6 of the World Championship. And the pawn just marches forward with the help of the rook and knight. He cements his position and only then pushes his pawn. So well done. And the pawn pushes, and that's it. Caruana resigns because the pawn is on a promote. There's no checks. The knight's covering everything. Black is out of checks. That was a long and painful loss for Caruana. Game 10 was a rook versus two minor piece in game. So there's very less pawns, just one white pawn. So it's very drawish. Knight moves, rook moves, and here king moves, king moves, king moves, and Caruana decides to force the draw, and he just runs away asking black to take the pawn and force the draw. A draw by insufficient material. Game 11, an equal position with the bishop of the same color and three pawns each. Here, Carlsen played king g6 and Caruana played a move king e8. And that's a big mistake because the white king is now in time to take the pawn. Instead, he should have played king d6. If bishop f4, there's always bishop e5. He went king e8, and now Carlsen's king comes in. King moves to e7, king g4. If bishop to e5, the c pawn falls. That is the problem. So he plays king d6, and now king f4. Bishop moves, and the pawn fell. Bishop waits, king f3, king e5, giving up the c pawn, but then getting the f pawn. But then bishop d4, bishop e5, and the c pawn is the pass pawn, and king is there to help it. King d5, bishop moves, and the pawn just runs forward. Same color bishop endgames with one pawn is not difficult to win. You just need one other pawn to be able to win that. So even if the bishop gives itself up, there is still the other pawn to promote in the pawn endgame. So bishop b6, and it's almost over because king e6 and the pawn is going to run forward. The f pawn is also falling. Game 12 was a minor piece endgame with three pawns on both sides. And it became a pawn endgame where the black king just has to hide in his castle. White cannot do anything, and black also cannot do anything. A draw by repetition. Game 13, Carlsen enjoyed a good opening here. He goes for knight takes, takes, takes. His idea is the exchange sack, a temporary exchange sack, because after queen takes, he gets back his material with the good position. Rook e1, bringing the rook in, and then takes, and b pawn fell. It's a pawn up. Bishop g4 is not something to worry about. He wins one more pawn, takes, one pawn up, and he cements that pawn. And that pawn is enough for the world champion to win this. He brings his pieces in, plays rook d5 defending, queen c7 defending, h4, and firmly blocking the king with h5, rook b8, and a4. The only weakness is b3, which is completely defended. Black cannot overextend here and attack because the king is also not safe. So things can easily go wrong. That should be a good way to lose. So black is like passive here, queen f7. Passive move, rook takes pawn. He gets a b pawn. Carlsen doesn't go for the rook and game. He keeps the rooks. Queen and game he's okay with. Queen d5. Oh, here he didn't mind the endgame because of queen takes, rook takes, and now the king will get in. So he didn't mind that there. Queen f8, a5, queen moves in, back, rook b7, the a pawn just runs forward, and a7, and it's all over because rook b8 is coming. Even if you play king h7, rook b8 is coming. So Caruana resigned here. Carlsen has an a pawn that is passed and is running queen b3. Doesn't mind the exchange, and the a pawn is all the way down to a3. Material wise, it's a pawn down for black, but knight saves itself. Bishop d4, rook moves, knight jumps in, knight e5, and here knight c3. A very nice move by Carlsen. The point is takes. It's a lot of exchanges, and exchanges favor the side that's winning because it's now a bishop versus knight and a nice pass pawn. Even though white's a pawn up, the a pawn will decide things. King comes in, knight moves, king comes in, knight e3, bishop c3, and here King f1, king d5. Knight moves, bishop e1 because the king is going to get in and he is going to lose the game because he will lose a rook. And Caruana resigned here. So another painful loss there for Caruana. This was his second loss straight. Game 15, Carlsen is white. Caruana just played h5 and he will regret that because rook b5. But then bishop d attacking the rook, so you don't have time to play rook takes pawn. But rook check, bishop b6, but now rook g5, king moves, and Carlsen wins the h pawn. And that's enough for him. Rook moves back, king moves in, rook c4, g6, check, king moves, and the rook gets in, but king f8. Rook moves in, and f3, preparing a nice mating net. g4 is mate, and there is not enough way to escape. Even if you have g5, rook h6 is coming. g4 would be a killer. So he gives up the exchange, but even after rook takes, same problem. g4, king f4, king is almost in trouble here, and the mate that's about to happen is going to be beautiful. f5, takes, rook f1, and here rook d3, and can you see the next move? Rook e4, mate. A beautiful mate. Carlsen was smiling after giving this nice checkmate to Caruana. Caruana on full tilt, three straight losses. This is the last game of the 3+1 segment, game number 16. As you can see, Caruana went for all in here, but that left his king a bit weak. So Carlsen has just played rook e8, knight jumps in, but then so does the rook. King h2, queen e6, the pieces are crawling in. And here rook b2, can you find out Carlsen's next move? A beautiful move, rook takes bishop. An exchange sacrifice, the idea is knight into f4. You can't take it because queen e3, and if king moves here, everything comes in. Rook f8, king g4, and rook f4 is mate. So that is why he played queen f3. So it's an exchange up for white, but then bishop e5. Takes, and it's a nice mass of center pawns. King h2, queen e7, the queen is jumping out this way. Rook c3, a4, h5, rook h2, king h6 defending the pawn, a4, a5, and queen into b4. Rook g1, queen takes b5. So here, there was an option here after rook g1. This was actually a chance for Caruana. Instead of rook g1, he should have played queen a8 because now the tables will turn. For example, if queen b5, queen h8 check, king g6, the rook jumps in. So the tables are turned. Black king is the one who's getting mated there. Instead, he went for rook g1, but then after queen b5, now queen a8 doesn't work because there's always queen c6 or queen d5 to exchange queens, and black would just win. So too late. He goes back to e1, but then queen d3, the pawns are just falling. Queen a8, but too late. Queen check, and the queens are exchanged. And after rook b2, knight d3, a fork, and Caruana resigned. So a game which could have been winning for Caruana, but it slipped right through his hands. So this ended the second segment, which was 3+1 time control, Blitz. Now they played 10 games of Bullet, 1+1. And right now, from games 13 to 16, Carlsen has been winning. So he's on a winning streak of 4 games. And here comes Bullet. The first game of Bullet, game 17, Caruana planted a knight on d3. Carlsen just calmly plays bishop g5. A nice exchange sacrifice. The point is, after knight takes, rook takes, white's pieces are active and the dark squares are weak. So that's a very good exchange sacrifice that shows how much Carlsen understands chess. Rook d3, but now queen c1, getting ready to play bishop h6, bishop b7, and knight f6. King h8, knight d4, burying that rook down there. Rook d8, queen f4. Takes, queen c6 threatening mate, but then knight e4 blocking it, and now firmly blocking the diagonal with f3. Takes, but then knight f6. And you can win the exchange there back. But Carlsen is not interested. He's threatening mate now. Bishop h6 and mate. Queen b6 threatening a nice cheapo there with rook f4. Discovered attack. But Carlsen just calmly plays king h2 and Caruana resigns because mate is incoming. Game 18 was a miniature game of 19 moves. Caruana just collapsed here because he allowed Carlsen to get this pawn to c6, and now a nice center pawn mass is going to form. Knight d4, bishop d7, bishop g3, and now e5. Knight b3, queen e7, preparing to bring the queen to the king side. e4, takes, And now f5. And it's already lost because f4 is coming. And when bishop h2, so after f4, Caruana resigned because if bishop h2, there was queen takes h4. And it's just mate. You can't do much. You'll have to give up your queen. So this is how Carlsen won this game in 19 moves. Game 19, Carlsen was white and he played h6. Here, Caruana went back with rook d8, but there was a nice move here which was difficult to find in bullet, of course. The idea was rook h4, because if pawn takes, there was queen e5, and you win back the rook and you're a piece up. So Caruana is a piece up right now, but the h pawn is enough compensation. h7, rook h8, queen h5, and now white is winning. Queen h6, rook f7 was possible. Exchange of queens with the pass pawn. Knight moves in, rook f4, f5, rook h4. Slowly the pieces are colliding together. Queen g8, queen e8. Black is holding on. King g8, king b8, sorry. King g2, knight d5, rook h6. And the rook and queen are about to play one piece down. Queen g8 is the threat. Queen c8. And now can you find the win? This queen takes. And here Caruana resigns because if queen takes, just a rook g8 and it wins. Game 20. Caruana played b4 here. Takes. The black queen cannot take it because of the bishop h7 discovered attack on the queen. So he goes rook c7, b5. Caruana plays bishop d3. He wants to keep the bishop on this diagonal, which defends the pawn and keeps an eye on this e6 square. So it's a very nice position for Caruana. You can see white's pieces are all active and black's pieces are passive. Queen e3, rook c8, still good for white. Bishop f1, queen c5. Now suddenly black's pieces are jumping up. They're getting out of their shell. They're getting out of jail. Queen f1, knight d7. No more threats. Queen f7 is not really a problem. Queen f7, just king h8. Caruana was counting on that check, but it's not a problem for Carlsen. And you can't take the knight because the rook hangs. So suddenly white's pieces are not that active and black's pieces have come out of their shell. Bishop h3 and rook f8. The tables have turned because if queen moves, the rook falls. I mean, rook takes rook would happen. So here he played bishop e6, but just king h8. You can't take the rook, you can't move the queen. Bishop f5, but then just knight e5. Queen d2, and now can you find the win? There's a nice move here. Knight g4 wins outright, but Carlsen plays something similar, which is also winning. Queen takes, rook takes. I mean, queen takes, if queen takes back, there was knight g4. That's why Caruana resigned right after queen f2. A nice tactic there by Carlsen, using the fork. Game 21, Caruana goes for g5, a small kingside attack there. Takes, queen f3, knight b2, giving up the pawn. But then king is a bit unsafe. King d7, queen check, king moves, and rook g8. King moves, queen c6. So now white's knight is super active there. And once a rook and queen jumps in, it will be very good for white. Queen check, g3. Carlsen firmly stops any attack there. h5 stopped by h4, rook g4, threatening rook into h4, but Carlsen stops it just by king g2. f5, preparing f4, but then just in time, rook b1 comes. And now c6. Because queen b2 was a threat. Queen b2, queen b2 was a threat. c6, and now knight d3, stopping f4. f4, knight takes. Just takes it. Bishop f5 and rook e1. Carlsen decides, let's just defend here. I don't want to attack. Just defend because 2 pawns up. And now one third pawn as well. h5 pawn is also hanging. And it's gone. And there's no attack. The pawns are just going to push forward. And after knight f4, Caruana resigned. Game 22, Carlsen decides to take some risk here. He castles long. Bishop g3, e5. Both kings are. White king is also not safe. Black king is not that safe, but he's comparatively safer. Takes. He takes the d5 pawn. Caruana has a pawn up, but then black's pieces are all active and black has a bishop pair. And where will white's king castle? He castles long, but then comes queen a4. The threat is queen c2, and it's not easy to stop it. Rook d2 was the correct move to stop it, but then Caruana played queen b3. And now queen takes, pawn takes, and then bishop c5, threatening Borden's mate with bishop e3. And there's just no defense. Carlsen had seen this, and that is why he exchanged queens. The bishop, the killer bishop, is covering this diagonal, and this bishop is about to come to e3. The funny thing is, white has no moves to defend it. You can't even go rook takes rook because then rook takes back and the same threat appears. So just a beautiful board and mate on the board in a bullet game, that too by the world champion. This is the kind of game that Carlsen would be proud of. When you're threatening mate and white has no way to stop it. Bishop c5, rook d2, bishop e3, completely pinned. And Carlsen does a nice trick here. He brings a rook here, threatening rook a1. White's pieces are completely stuck. King can't move, rooks can't move. Only knight and bishop can move, but they can't do anything against this rook a1 threat. Game 23. Caruana is black. He gains some space on the king side. Takes g4, f4, h6. King goes back, rook e5. Now the weakness of the king comes into the light because now queen e7 defending it, but c4. He's striking at the center. Rook moves, takes, queen c4. Knight moves and then d5. More strikes in the center. Takes, pawn takes, and queen d4. Keeping an eye on g7 if the black queen moves. He just gives the pawn with a check, but king doesn't take it. If you take it, then queen check, king moves, and the pawn would have fallen. The more important pawn on h6 would have fallen. So he just plays king h3, queen d6, giving up the pawn, rook g5, king moves, and now queen g7. It's over because if king e8, there is just queen h7 and then mate incoming. The mistake was probably queen d6. What was the need for queen d6? Rook g5 was defended. Queen f6 was there. Just move the queen to f6, but then rook e8. Black had no options here. Black has no way to save the g pawn. Wow, such a nice game by Carlsen. Game 24. Carlsen is black and Caruana is white. Caruana has an extra pawn over here, but the rook is in front of the pawn. So the only way to win this is by getting the pawn all the way down there and then give a check with the rook and then promote. But then black king just stays on g7 and f6. This is the Vancouver draw. Because if the king comes in, let's say to e6, then rook would come in. After pawn push, rook would come in and then white would promote. For example, c7, he just goes h7 and g7. Black has to just stay here. If he gets out, then rook check and white wins. But as long as he stays there, rook cannot get out of this square because the pawn would fall. Because if rook check, king would just take it and the pawn is firmly stopped. And if the king gets in somehow, let's say to this square, then we start giving checks, not allowing the king to stay there next to the pawn. So this is called the Vancouver draw, and that's what happened. And the game was drawn by repetition or by agreement. Actually, by agreement with king h7. Game number 25. By now, Caruana is already hoping that this ordeal should be over pretty soon. Just two games left, including this. A3, b4, and he's heading for that a pawn. He's Carlsen. Bishop d6, king b3. King b5. Carlsen can take the pawn, but if you take the pawn, just exchange and the white pawn cannot really progress. King will stay there and things are closed over here. So that is why Carlsen went for rook d2, not taking the pawn. He wants to activate his pieces. Rook d5, takes. It's still equal, but then rook f8 was a big blunder by Caruana in an equal position. Do you see it? Skewer possibility over here. Carlsen spotted it instantly in a bullet game. Takes, check, king moves. So there is no square available for the check here. You can't do rook takes bishop now. So Carlsen gives a check, king moves, and now rook takes bishop. And Caruana just resigns because it's a full piece. Bishop b4 and white would be up a full piece here. So that's a unfortunate loss here for Caruana. The last game of the match. This time, Carlsen has a pass pawn, outside pass pawn, but rook is in front of the pawn. So all Caruana has to do is just stay. Yeah, the rook just stay around here without allowing the rook to give any checks. Rook check, king moves, pawn push, and then just king g2 and h2. White will just wait here and it became a draw by repetition. If white brings a king to f2, trying to stop this pawn, to take this pawn, then it would be a blunder. For example, after this, let's say king f2. Then rook h2 comes, rook h1 comes, and you can't take the pawn because of the skewer. Which is why all white has to do is stay on g2 and h2. Black can't get out. This is the Vancouver draw that we just saw two games back. It's a draw by repetition, and that ended the match. in favor of Carlsen 22 to 4. Carlsen did not lose even a single game. There were 8 draws, and the remaining games were won by Carlsen. A comprehensive victory by the world champion.